Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. Well, in this episode, let's travel back into the deep recesses of church history. We're going back almost to the very beginning, and we're going to tackle a controversial question. Now, depending on your denominational background, the answers to this question may have some different opinions. According to Roman Catholic tradition, the Apostle Peter is widely regarded as the first pope of the church, the one whom Jesus himself gave all authority to rule and govern the church. But is this really when the papacy began? Let's journey through church history and try to make some sense of this difficult question. When did the papacy of the Catholic Church officially begin? Well, here's what we know. In Matthew 16, Jesus said these words to the Apostle Peter. "And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." So the Roman Catholic tradition argues that this was Jesus handing full absolute authority and rule of the church over to Peter, who was the first father of the church. And in Latin, that's Papa, where we get the English translation of Pope. Thus, this is where the argument comes that Peter was the first pope of the church. But here's the truth. The reality is, and this is not just a denominational distinctive as much as it is historical, there's no connection between Peter's leadership of the church and the Roman Catholic understanding of the papacy as the absolute leadership of the church as we see it today. The church has one ruler and one Lord, and that is Jesus Christ and Him alone. Rather, in Matthew 16, Jesus was referencing here the foundational role that Peter and the apostles would play in the formation of the church. They, like all of us, were mere men, instruments that God would use for miraculous purposes. And Peter himself understood this as he led the church humbly and imperfectly, I might add, in the years after Christ's resurrection. And truthfully, this is how it was for the most part during the first 3 centuries or so of the church. Men were appointed as pastors and bishops, and that's essentially the same word, pastors and bishops, over the regional churches with the goal of leading the flock humbly under the leadership of Jesus Christ, the true head of the church. And one of these regional churches was in Rome, which had its own bishop. But in the 4th and 5th centuries AD, and this was when Christianity went from an outcast in the Roman world to the dominant faith in the Roman world, church leaders began to grow in authority and power. They were called upon by emperors such as Constantine the Great, if you remember, to establish church doctrine and also even to intervene in secular matters. So as such, churchmen grew in great power. Bishops and archbishops rose to the levels of princes and dukes and knights. And the Bishop of Rome, the center of the church on the ashes of the old Roman Empire, would become the most powerful man in the church. He would actually become on par with emperors and kings. He became the Papa, or the Pope, of the church. Now, this was not an immediate transaction, but by the early Middle Ages, we see a power structure very similar to the papal power structure we see today, where the Pope wielded absolute power over the affairs of the church and significant power over secular affairs as well. Now, for better or worse, this system would come to dominate the fabric of medieval Europe for over 1,000 years. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.